Greetings, heroes and villains alike, and welcome to Roll for Crit's official ranking of every single Marvel Legendary set currently available. Marvel Legendary is a deck-building game from Upper Deck Entertainment featuring Marvel Comics characters. It's been around for a while now, and it's one of our favorites here at Roll for Crit, and I have painstakingly gone through every single expansion over a series of, years, in order to give you my opinion on which ones are the best and which ones are the less best. The main things I'll be focusing on in terms of the criteria by which I judge these expansions is, first of all, their keywords, the brand new mechanics or techniques that are added alongside any other unique decks or types of cards that are brought into the game from a particular expansion. Beyond that, I'm interested in which heroes are more fun to play as and how much variety they add to the game, not so much the difficulty of them or how strong the heroes are, although that may come up from time to time. I'm really looking at which of these sets do I think are the most essential. Which ones would I recommend you must have in your collection if you're just starting out, and which ones would I not miss so much if, for instance, Thanos were to snap them out of existence? I already did a Legendary Rankings video about 2 years ago, but since then, a lot more expansions have come out. Also in that video, I separated it into 2 lists for the small box releases and the big box releases. This time, no such separation. They've all got to duke it out, fight it out with each other no matter what size they are. I tried to judge them based on the value you got compared to the size of them, so the bigger expansions aren't necessarily going to be all better than the smaller expansions in my list. I'll also be pointing out my personal favorite hero and scheme from each expansion, so look forward to that. All that preamble out of the way, let's get into it, starting with number 25. At the very bottom of my list is the Marvel Studios Phase 1 box set. Probably not a surprise to fans of the game, this is a pretty easy one for people to pick on. It's simply a reskin of the original core set, only instead of comic book style art, it has stills from the movies, photos of the characters from the recent Marvel Cinematic Universe films in various poses, but the cards themselves are, for the most part, exactly the same as the original base set. There are a few new things in here. There is one new keyword called Location Conqueror that has to do with certain positions in the city. So there's some new stuff, but it's really all overshadowed by the fact that, well, you've seen 95% of it before, and that the stills they used don't even look that good, even if you do like movie stills in your card art. They all have the title of the movie they're from plastered over them in a tacky way. I don't know if that was a legal mandate or if they were just afraid that you would forget which movie the character Thor is from. It's Thor, by the way, but it ends up looking bad. So this one is a very easy one to skip. Of all the legendary sets that are available, this is the one I would absolutely recommend that no one buy unless you know someone who is afraid to get into Legendary because it looks too nerdy for them, like they're super casual board game player and they just love the Marvel movies. This might be a way to get them interested because it's got Robert Downey Jr. in it and everything like that. And that's fine, but if you like the game already, you can skip it. My favorite hero from this set is Captain America. His movie title is the longest, so I like that takes up even more space on the bottom. And my favorite scheme is the one that was originally called the Legacy Virus in the base set. They renamed it to Radioactive Palladium Poisoning. Doesn't that sound fun? Number 24 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Again, maybe not too much of a surprise, especially after you heard my bottom pick. This is the other Marvel Legendary set that uses photos from a movie instead of comic book style art. And the results are a little better than the Marvel Cinematic one. For one thing, these cards are all original. They're not reskins. You can't get these anywhere else. And I do like the Spider-Man Homecoming movie, and I do enjoy some aspects of this set. It brings in the coordinate keyword, which allows you to play cards outside of your turn to help other players. This comes in from the Encounters sets, which use it pretty regularly, but otherwise hasn't been seen in traditional Marvel Legendary. And I like that. It makes the game feel more cooperative, and it's appropriate for the theme, because of course in the movie everyone's working together. There's some interesting characters in this one, like you can play as Happy Hogan, or just Peter's friends, which is nice, but clearly they were a little bit stretching because they only have so much to work with. You're fighting against Vulture as one of the masterminds, and sometimes you're just fighting different parts of his body as a villain. Like you can be fighting Vulture's wings or Vulture's talons. Yeah, it's not exactly the most imaginative thing, but it's not the worst ever, and it does kind of make the Marvel Cinematic set a little bit better in my mind, gives it a little bit more of a reason to exist, because I personally really don't like having the two styles mixed together, the photos and the art. So at least this way you could play this with that set using those base cards, so it's more consistent. My favorite hero in this set is Peter's allies. I think this is interesting because it's the only really true support class that I can think of. It's just meant to help clear the board and support other players, and you get to use Aunt May. My favorite scheme is Distract the Hero. In this one, if a twist comes up, you have to defeat a villain that turn, or the twist becomes a villainous distraction, and if you get too many of those, you lose. I think it's interesting. It puts a little more pressure on you to try to take someone out when that appears. Number 23 is Fear Itself, the only expansion as of now that is specifically based on the Villains core set. This one comes from the Fear Itself storyline. This set brings back artifacts from the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion. I really like artifacts, and this one adds a new twist on it, which is that they can be thrown. And if you throw an artifact that you have in front of you by placing it at the bottom of your deck, then it has an additional effect. I think that's cool and thematic, something we'll see again later on. Little tease for the future of this video. But ultimately, I'm not that big a fan of the villain's playstyle. It's more geared towards a more competitive atmosphere. There are more cards that hurt each other rather than help each other. It's not the way that I love to play, and the overall mood and theme and tone of the story, it just isn't one of my favorite things from the Marvel Universe. So this one I rank, well, at 23. It's pretty low. My favorite hero from this set is Skirn, Breaker of Men, who allows you to get a whole bunch of new recruits, which I think are pretty nice cards to have, so I enjoy being able to make use of them more often. My favorite scheme from this set is the Traitor. On your turn, you might become a hidden traitor and be able to use your attack power to stop everyone else from winning instead of helping out to beat the game yourself. I know I said I don't usually like the competitive style in Legendary, but in this case, everyone else is a bad guy, and if you're the traitor, that means you're a good guy. So it's really for the best. At number 22 is Deadpool. It includes some more versions of Deadpool and all of his friends coming along, and this set, as you would expect from one themed around Deadpool, is all about breaking the fourth wall. It's a bit goofier, a bit sillier than the other Legendary expansions tend to be. One of the things that a lot of cards have is half points, so it'll be worth 4.5 attack or 3.5 recruit, which is stupid in my opinion. I mean, it's fine. It doesn't really hurt the game, but it doesn't help it either. It's just another thing you have to keep track of. But it's kind of funny, I guess. There are also cards that have different effects depending on what time of day it is, or if you are taller or shorter than other people at your game table. Interesting ideas, and I see what they were trying to do with this one, but I don't know. It's not fun to me to get up in the middle of the game and try to figure out, hold on, are you half an inch taller than me? That's just not what I want to do when I'm enjoying a board game. This isn't my style of play, but for people who love Deadpool, you're probably going to love this one. It has a lot of flavor text that is often pretty funny. It also adds the excessive violence keyword, which is you get a special benefit if you overkill a villain by 1 attack point. And I really like that because sometimes you have that extra attack point and you feel like, oh, I wasted it. In this case, you actually want to try to get one more to get that extra perk. Favorite hero? Bob, Agent of Hydra, because he's Bob, Agent of Hydra. And he has a power where he takes someone else's card from the top of their deck and asks them a yes or no question about it. And if they're right, they get it. And if they're wrong, he gets to draw one. Stupid, but I like it. Speaking of stupid, my favorite scheme is Deadpool Writes a Scheme. The idea of this one is that Deadpool is making it up as he goes, so each twist does something new, usually related to the number of twist it is. It's not really a good scheme, but I find it funny. Number 21 is Dimensions. This one includes a hodgepodge of random characters, some of which already existed in the game, but they were exclusive to different trading card packs that Upper Deck was selling, so they were hard to get your hands on unless you went through eBay. Your hero cards include Howard the Duck, Jessica Jones, Man-Thing, and Squirrel Girl. All of them fan favorites to be sure, and I'm really glad that they're in the game. But I don't know that I love the way they were implemented. The big new keyword in this one is switcheroo, and the way that one works is you can trade the card that you're playing in for one of a slightly higher cost from the HQ. And usually they have a different effect that you can use if you don't want to switcheroo it for something new. But I just find something fundamentally flawed about the idea of creating a keyword that implies that the card that you're getting, you're eventually gonna trade it up for something better. Like, I'd rather just get a card that I know is going to be good than get a card that's gonna be just okay in the hopes that it becomes better in the future. It does feel kind of cool to upgrade and evolve as you go, but it's a little disappointing if you're a big fan of Squirrel Girl and her big move is to trade her in for someone else that's better. To me, that's disappointing. Still, it's nice to have some variety and some more off-the-wall characters that might not fit into other packs, along with J. Jonah Jameson, who is a pretty funny mastermind. He has an angry mob that protects him. I also gotta say, this might include some of the worst art in Legendary, including what might be my least favorite card to look at, think about, or say, which is Squirrel Girl's Nut Punch. My favorite Dimensions hero is Man-Thing, who gets more power when villains aren't next to other villains or when the city is clear. And my favorite scheme is No Scheme because this is the only expansion so far that does not include any new schemes. My number 20 is Marvel Champions. No, not that Marvel Champions, this Marvel Champions, the Legendary version. It brings you the Champions team, including Ms. Marvel, Totally Awesome Hulk, and Gwenpool. And Nova. And the cards work pretty well for the most part. They have a new keyword called Cheering Crowds. Gives you more actions if you have bystanders. Sometimes it might not work out depending on what schemes you're playing with. Bystanders could be more or less plentiful. It also brings back some more stuff from older sets like the Versatile keyword and the Demolish keyword along with size changing, which makes sense for someone like Ms. Marvel, for instance. This one is a decent set, I think. It's okay. Some of the heroes are pretty strong, but I don't find that any of them really stand out in any particular way that makes me feel like this one is a must-have, especially because I don't really have too much familiarity with these characters, so they don't thrill me that much. That might be different for you. I do like Fin Fang Foom, and he's one of the masterminds in this one. My favorite hero is Ms. Marvel, who has a lot of versatile keywords, lets you use either attack or recruit on her cards. I appreciate that. And my favorite scheme is Clash of the Monsters Unleashed, in which you pit villains from your victory pile up against monsters from a monster pile, and if they're not strong enough, you get wounded. You get your own gladiator battles. At number 19 is the Ant-Man expansion. It includes Ant-Man and Wasp, among others. Size changing was an existing keyword that allows you to buy cards cheaper if you have cards of a certain color. In this one, they upped the ante by adding microscopic size changing, which is the same thing, but you can just do it more times. It's a little bit lacking in the imagination department, especially for Ant-Man, who, if anyone should have something cool that has to do with changing size and going microscopic, it should be him. So to me, that one's disappointing. Still, it is satisfying when you are able to purchase some of those bigger cards earlier on because you have a bunch of, for instance, the Red Wasp cards that reduce the price of her more expensive ones. That can feel pretty good. You've also got the Empowered keyword, which gives you extra attack based on the colors of heroes in the HQ. So now you might want to be thinking about which cards you leave there and trying to convince your friends not to buy certain ones so that you can have a better field for you on your turn. Then there's Chivalrous Duel, which villains may have. It means you can only use cards of one hero to attack them because, it's chivalrous. A fun idea, also can be very, very annoying. You really have to plan your deck around that one sometimes. Overall, I just don't really love the size-changing keyword all that much. For me, I feel like Ant-Man maybe deserved something a little cooler, but it is nice to finally see him added to the game after a very long time. My favorite hero in this one is Jocasta. This set is all about keeping your discard pile empty or shuffling your discard pile back into your deck, allowing you to get those cards you've recruited faster. My favorite scheme is Age of Ultron, naturally. This one involves a bunch of Ultron robots entering the city and getting stronger and stronger, and you have to defeat them before it's too late. At number 18 is Legendary Villains. This is the only other core set release, if you don't count the Marvel Cinematic Universe one, which I guess I'm not counting it anymore. It's a completely standalone version of the game that uses most of the same rules, but with some keyword changes here and there, and some terminology differences. Instead of wounds, they're called bindings, and they act a little differently. It also adds Madam Hydra instead of Maria Hill, who has the dodge ability. That's one of the new keywords. If you don't want a card in your hand, you can use dodge to discard it and draw a new one to replace it. I like that ability a lot, and I actually think that Madam Hydras are more useful because of it than Maria Hill is in the base game. Also added new recruits, which give you an attack power and let you draw a card. Also, I think, very powerful, especially considering how cheap they are. And with a character like Spider-Man, they can be really strong. This one, though, is lower on my list overall because I just think it muddled things up too much. And based on the fact that they only released one other expansion within the Villains framework after this, I think Upper Deck got the same idea. Fans didn't react to this one quite as strongly. I know it has its fans, a lot of people like it, but overall, it went into the thing, again, like I said, of player versus player, more competitive. There's more things you can do that will make people discard or give people wounds, which is interesting. It's just not my favorite thing. It's not my cup of tea necessarily. It really just confuses things when you eventually want to bring this over into the rest of the game's components and mix them together. Now you have to keep track of, does this mean a binding or a wound? And are they interchangeable? Should we just say they're interchangeable? Well, we can, but some cards clearly were designed around one or the other, so they don't really quite work that way. So then you decide, well, do we just leave them out entirely and just replace those cards? Do we keep new recruits in every game? I like new recruits, and I like Madam Hydra, but now I've got like 6 extra decks all combined with all the different expansions of things I might want to do on my turn. And it's just a lot. And I think ultimately we would be better off if they didn't make this set, or alternately if they maybe reprinted it, but reworked it to use some of the terminology from main Legendary sets, because they have released new villains you can play as later on. They just call them heroes because it's just easier that way. My favorite from this set is Venom. He captures bystanders and then he eats them to gain power. What's not to love? My favorite scheme is Crown Thor, King of Asgard. In this one, Thor comes into the city and he's jumping around and he's getting in and out of your victory piles and he's just causing a whole mess. That pesky Thor. Number 17 is Venom. This one includes a new version of Venom himself, plus Carnage and some Venom version of other heroes, Rocket, Doctor Strange, and yes, Venompool. And like the Deadpool set, this one brings back excessive violence, which is a keyword I enjoyed. It also adds digest and indigestion, which makes you look at your victory pile and see if you have a certain number of cards in it. And if you have digest 3, for instance, and you have 3 cards in your victory pile, you can carry out that ability. Indigestion is if you don't have that number of cards yet. Something else happens. So it gives you a certain effect either way, which is cool. Very thematic as well. as is the new symbiotic bond function. Certain masterminds or villains or some schemes will cause this to happen where they will bond with each other, and now you have to take on their combined strength, and even then, you only get to defeat one of those two cards after they've bonded, and then you have to still defeat the one that's left normally. This can cause some headaches. It can be a difficult set, I think, but I enjoyed it, and I do think the thematic nature of things bonding together was really cool. My favorite hero in this one is Venomized Doctor Strange. He gives you some good ways to get through your deck faster, also makes you worry about the costs of different cards that you're playing in a unique way. My favorite scheme is Symbiotic Absorption. A second mastermind lurks out of sight, adding one of their tactic cards to the main mastermind and sometimes using their own Master Strike ability. Number 16 is the Captain America 75th Anniversary expansion. Of course, this is a must-have if you're a Captain America fan. Keywords here include Man Out of Time, which allows you to take a card that you've played and set it aside, then play it again on your following turn, first thing, in addition to other cards. So it's nice, you still get a full hand of cards, you get to use that thing twice in a row, but you have to work around it because you can't be as strategic as to when you want to use it. Savior is another one that gives you a certain ability as long as you have a minimum of 3 bystanders in your victory pile, so encourages you to save people, something Captain America probably does. I don't know, I've heard he does that sometimes. You've also got the Falcon version of Captain America that you can play as in this one, Agent X-13, and Captain America 1941, featuring some very cool retro art. This is a good set, I think. It has some creative schemes in it. Overall, it doesn't really break the mold or bring anything revolutionary to the table, other than maybe the Revolutionary War because of America, but it's good. My favorite hero from this set is Winter Soldier. Makes great use of the Man Out of Time keyword, rewarding you for having played more cards on your turn, and it does not have an official team affiliation. I think it's interesting having some of those no team cards in the mix. Favorite scheme is Change the Outcome of World War II. This one turns your city into different countries during World War II. They have different sizes depending on which country it is, Poland, France, USSR, etc. You have to make sure that villains don't escape or else those capitals will be conquered by the Axis. Number 15 is Heroes of Asgard, an expansion based around Thor lore. The lore from Thor includes Thor and Valkyrie and Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, and it brings back artifacts and throne artifacts, which I like a lot, especially in the case of Thor. You can throw Mjolnir, but only if you are worthy. That's the other new keyword in this one. In order to be considered worthy, you need to have at least one 5-cost card in hand. And especially early on in the game, that can be tough. So this is a difficult thing depending on the scheme, how many players you have. You might get thrown out of whack by how worthy you are, which is appropriate. It should be hard to be worthy. This also brings back the Conqueror keyword from the MCU expansion, putting it to a little bit better use, I think. And added to the mix are villainous weapons. Now, villains may have weapons come out of the villain deck, and if you defeat them, you get those weapons for yourself. I really like that idea of being able to remove the item from another villain and use it in your own deck. Makes it feel more alive. My favorite hero set in this one is Thor himself, because I just love being able to play Thor's hammer and then throw it and take out a bunch of enemies that way. My favorite scheme is Ragnarok, Twilight of the Gods. In this one, the world is ending, and at certain points you're going to have to take cards from your victory pile, put them back into the city as villains, and then if the total attack power of the villains in the city is equal to a certain threshold, they might be able to defeat Balder or Odin or whichever other gods come next. New Mutants is number 14 on my list. This one includes some of those new mutants that you're familiar with, like Warlock and Wolfsbane. And the big centerpiece of this set is a new mechanic centering around sunlight and moonlight. The way it works is if there are more odd or even numbered costing cards in the HQ at any given time, then you know you're either in sunlight or moonlight. So if it's more evens, it's sunlight. More odds, it's moonlight. I was pretty skeptical of this mechanic at first because it seemed like another thing that you have to track and keep counting the different cards. And even in the rulebook, they have a whole section that tells you, here are some ways to remember which one triggers by an odd number and which one is by even numbers and which cards do what. And if you have to make a section for that in the rule book, maybe it's just not the most intuitive mechanic, but in practice, I found it worked out pretty well, and I actually really enjoyed that puzzle of looking at the HQ and now deciding maybe I want to buy one of those new cards for my deck, not just because it's a good card, but because I want a specific number, odd or even, to hopefully come out and now be the dominant number. And you're going to have to maybe argue with your friends and say, don't buy that, please, because I have a sunlight ability and I'd really like to use it on my next turn. There's also some interesting stuff regarding the gray hero cards. For instance, Emma Frost is a mastermind, and she has more attack the more gray cards you have. So you want to get rid of those even faster. There's also the Waking Nightmare keyword in this one. If you discard a non-gray hero, you can have a Waking Nightmare and draw a card. Sometimes this is used as a punishment, but sometimes you might want to do it. It can help you out because you're going to get to maybe get an even better card that's better suited to what you want it to do. Or if nothing else, cycle through your deck for some bad cards and get them out faster. My favorite hero from this set is Mirage. She has some cool ways to let you draw cards by discarding other cards, but some of her cards, if you discard them, you get to put aside for your next hand. So you can keep on cycling those through to let you draw more cards in the future. My favorite scheme is Superhuman Baseball Game. This is a weird one. You rearrange the decks on the board for the villains so that it represents the layout of a baseball field. And when a twist comes out, villains try to score runs and hit home plate. I applaud the creativity. My number 13 is Paint the Town Red, all Spider-Man and Spider-Friends expansion. I am a huge Spider-Man fan. He's definitely my favorite superhero. I know that's not a very original thought, but it's true. But I am not that big of a fan of the way Spider-Man is implemented in the Legendary system. All his cards, and therefore all the cards of his friends that he needs to mix well with, cost 2. And the idea is they all revolve around being able to draw 2 costing cards, and they're really cheap, so they're easy to get a lot of. But I find that because they're so cheap, it also becomes harder for them to actually be really effective unless you have a ton of them. And even then, I'd rather just have normal priced cards that I can get maybe a little later, but will be stronger for me in most situations. But for what it's going for, it still does a good job. There's some great new choices in here. Black Cat, Scarlet Spider. It's really fun to see different aspects because there are so many Spider-Man characters that you can add to this game. There's also the new keyword Wall Crawl. If you recruit a hero with the Wall Crawl keyword, it goes on top of your deck instead of into your discard pile, so you're going to get it a lot quicker. That's very much appreciated. And there's some new menaces in the form of Carnage and Mysterio. I think both are really fun, creative masterminds, and Carnage makes use of the new Feast keyword, which KOs the top card of your deck, but sometimes that can be helpful. My favorite Paint the Town Red hero is Scarlet Spider. He has tons of wall crawl cards, and he has tons of draw card cards. So if you're using him with other Spider heroes, then it's very easy for you to recruit a hero and possibly draw it on the same turn. My favorite scheme is Splice Humans with Spider DNA. This one gives every hero card wall crawl, so everything you recruit will always go on top of your deck. This tends to speed the game up. It's a bit of spice that I really enjoy from time to time. Number 12 is the Noir expansion, based on the series of Marvel Noir comics, which take classic characters and put them in 30s and 40s settings with trench coats and goggles and hats. I'm a big fan of the aesthetic. I really like the theme of this one. It includes Spider-Man again, Luke Cage, a steampunk version of Iron Man, a Green Goblin crime boss, some really fun stuff there. New keywords are Investigate. This lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and you might be investigating for a specific type of card, or you might even be able to investigate the villain deck or a different deck at certain times. I think this is a good one that pairs very well with a lot of other cards that want you to know what's on the top of your deck. There are also hidden witnesses. Bystanders will go face down on top of villains, and you need to clear those bystanders before you can attack the villain, because you have to question the witnesses to find out where the bad guy is. Very thematic. My favorite Noir hero is Luke Cage. He's all about cards that cost 4 or more. so he doesn't have too many cheap cards, but if you get a lot of those mid to high level costing cards, he will let you draw a lot of them. My favorite scheme is Find the Split Personality Killer, which turns Legendary into a deduction game. Every time a twist comes out, you're adding a couple bystanders and a random hero into a pile, and you have to decide when you should investigate that pile to try and figure out which hero has the most cards in that deck, and that hero is the Split Personality Killer. And if you figure it out, you win. It doesn't even matter who the mastermind is or if you defeated them or not. If you deduced the Split Personality Killer, you win. Number 11 is Secret Wars Volume 2. This has a bunch of cool characters added to the mix, some that are maybe more obscure than others, but I like a lot of them, including some new Spider friends, Silk and Spider-Gwen, plus Agent Venom, who I think is pretty neat. I think he's neat. Charge is a new keyword that sends villains rushing through the city faster than normal, which is scary. There's also Spectrum, which encourages you to get more heroes of different class types, and Patrol, which maybe didn't need to be a keyword necessarily, but I still like the idea of it, where you will patrol certain areas, for instance, patrol the sewers on the city space. And if the sewers are empty, you will get some kind of a bonus. So you might want to make sure you keep those clear. So you kind of feel like, oh, that's my job. I'm going to take care of the sewers, or whatever the case may be. My favorite hero from Volume 2 of Secret Wars is Beast. He is a multi-class hero, so all of his cards feature both strength and tech classes and make great use of being able to play both of those types of cards on your turn. This mechanic was introduced in Volume 1, but I really like the way they used it with Beast. My favorite scheme is the God Emperor of Battle World. This scheme becomes a new God Emperor mastermind, and at a certain stage of the game, it might KO the other mastermind or masterminds that are around in the game. We're entering the top 10 now with Civil War. Obviously, this is a big one and has a lot of big characters in it. You've got Daredevil, Luke Cage, Tigra, Vision, Iron Man and Maria Hill are masterminds now, so you can go up against them for thematic purposes. This one introduced size changing, which I already said I'm not a huge fan of. Also introduces phasing, which lets you replace a card with the top card of your deck. Could be useful if used in combination with certain other types of cards. But my favorite new thing in this set is divided cards. Now some characters will have cards that are divided into two, and you'll actually see a split 2 cards side by side, and on your turn, you can decide which one of those you want to play, or for some heroes, in some cases, you might actually get to use both of them at once. I love cards that make you make a decision, and depending on what the situation is, you might want one over the other. I think that's really interesting, and thematically it's cool and cool to look at, and I don't think it's too hard to read personally. This also adds grievous wounds to the mix. They're like regular wounds, but they're a lot worse. You actually have to do something to get rid of them. It makes wounds more interesting and much more dangerous. But to counterbalance that, you get Pet Avengers now as sidekicks. You can have pets in your deck. You can have pets. My favorite hero from this set is Cloak and Dagger. I like the divided card thing, and I think they exemplify what makes it cool better than any other hero. And my favorite scheme is Avengers versus X-Men. You don't actually have to have those two teams fighting each other. Any two teams will do, and if players have cards from both teams, they are punished, so you're encouraged to pick one side or the other. My number 9, single digits now, is the Shield expansion. This one highlights characters made famous in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show most recently. You've got Agent Coulson, you have Mockingbird and Quake and Deathlock. Some cool characters in there, and they're all S.H.I.E.L.D. affiliated, which is nice to see because, your starting hands are all S.H.I.E.L.D. cards, but there aren't a ton of S.H.I.E.L.D. heroes, so I really like them filling that out. And that leads me to the biggest thing about this set, new S.H.I.E.L.D. officers. Up until this point, you only had Maria Hill cards that you could recruit, and they weren't that great. S.H.I.E.L.D. officers are there to mix things up. The deck is now face down, and you might get one of these ones, which are a little bit better. They have more interesting abilities. Unfortunately, in my experience, I found that in most cases, I still preferred going for a card from the HQ or maybe a sidekick over one of these shield officers. Even though the shield officers are better, those Maria Hill cards are still in there and they still aren't that great. But a lot of the cards from this set, at least, make use of that deck and will help you get through that faster, so you might see those. There's a whole thing now with shield and Hydra levels, which is based on how many shield cards you have in your victory pile versus how many shield cards are in the escape pile. But it also works with Hydra cards, and that sometimes confuses me because Hydra cards affect the shield level, but shield cards also affect the Hydra level. Again, it goes back to the whole villains thing really mucking up the works for me, but still an interesting mechanic. And now you can send cards undercover, which means you can send shield cards to your victory pile, another great way to whittle down your deck early on. And beyond that, there are now adapting masterminds. Their tactics will change how they work. So every time you fight them, they're going to adapt and have potentially a whole new set of abilities or even attack power. A lot of the heroes in this set work similarly, but my favorite was Mockingbird. She has an ability that gives you 1 extra attack for every 2 levels of shield that you have, which can be useful. My favorite scheme is Hail Hydra. When a twist comes out, you have to say either I'd never abandon shield or whisper Hail Hydra. And depending on what you say, you either can only fight or only recruit that turn. Number 8 is Revelations. This one finally brings Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch into the fold, among other characters, of course. Quicksilver and a lot of other speedy characters, like Speed, have the Hyperspeed keyword. Lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and you get an attack point for each one that has an attack symbol, or sometimes a recruit point for each one that has a recruit symbol. Even if you don't get that benefit, you will discard all of the cards that you hyperspeeded this way, which is a really great way to get through your deck a lot quicker, especially early on. Last Stand is a keyword that gives you +1 attack for every empty space of the city, so you really want to clear that out, and that can be pretty powerful at certain stages of the game. And speaking of the city, there's now a whole new card type, Locations. Locations come out from the villain deck, and you can attack them like villains, but also other villains will stand inside of them, and they'll usually get some kind of a benefit for being on a location. This really adds some life to the game, makes it feel more dynamic, so you're not just always fighting in the sewers or at the bank. It's somewhere more interesting, like the Raft Prison, perhaps. There are also some very cool schemes. They can now transform. So at a certain stage, the schemes will flip over and have all new abilities, and then sometimes they'll flip back, and you have to balance your strategy based on which side is currently showing. Then there's also Mandarin, and he has a unique set of henchmen, Mandarin's rings, naturally. But in this case, each one of those henchmen is different. So they all have a different effect, and I really like the way that shakes things up. My favorite hero was Hellcat. She has some abilities that allow you to look at the top card of the villain deck and potentially move that card to the bottom of it to help your chances. And for schemes, it's gotta be the Korvac Saga. In this one, a brand new enemy enters play called Korvac with 19 attack points. And if you beat him, the mastermind is completely KO'd and the game ends. So you could try to just build up a ton of attack for one giant turn if you don't feel like whittling down the mastermind bit by bit. My number 7 pick is Legendary, a Marvel deck building game. That's right, I am ranking the original core set as a part of this list. You might be saying to yourself, what's the point of that? I have to own the core set. I don't care where it's ranked. It's essential to play the game. And that may be true. But I thought it would be interesting to try to look at this objectively and pretend that this is a standalone set that you don't need the core for, and look at the heroes, the keywords, the villains, and everything else included in there as it compares to all of the other expansions, or villains, or MCU, which are both also core sets. And I think it holds up, for the most part, pretty well. It's hard to go wrong with this one because if you want one of those big name characters, most of them are going to be in here. Spider-Man, Hulk, Wolverine, Deadpool. They're in there. Iron Man, they're in there. You know, the ones that most times when people sit down to the table and they say, hey, can I play as this character? they're probably going to be in this box unless they're a real hardcore Marvel nerd. And you would think that over time, these characters might become irrelevant and they've been replaced by maybe newer versions of the characters. But I think for the most part, they stay pretty consistent, at least in terms of how viable they are in play. They are definitely a little simpler, and in some cases, not always as thematic and as interesting as later heroes are in later sets. But sometimes it's okay to have a little bit of that simplicity, and sometimes things do get a little bloated, and it's nice to go back to basics. Another thing keeping the core set down is that the masterminds included here aren't super tough. In general, the difficulty of the game was kind of low. Poor Red Skull, he's kind of a pushover, but later games added extra difficulty settings that can remedy that. This one also suffers a bit from having the same artwork on every card before they varied things up for all of the other expansions, so not quite as interesting to look at, and overall more basic than other sets, but as the one that started it all, I still think it holds up okay. Pretty well, in fact. My favorite original hero is Hulk. He gains wounds, and he gives wounds to other players and uses those wounds for power, just like the real Hulk. My favorite original scheme is Secret Invasion of the Skrull Shapeshifters. Most of the schemes in the core set are pretty straightforward and don't add too much complication to the game, but this one is interesting in that heroes from the HQ become villains, they're secret Skrulls, and you have to fight them to gain their cards. At number 6, I'm putting Secret Wars Volume 1. I know this is a fair bit higher than Volume 2, and I think a lot of people prefer Volume 2 to Volume 1, and they are kind of close, but for me, this one edges out its successor. I think that the heroes it included are a little more interesting. You've got a big variety. You've got new X-Men, Kitty Pryde, Ultimate Spider-Man is a big one, Doctor Strange, Black Panther. So a really nice wide variety of interesting characters that do interesting things. As I said earlier, this one introduced the multi-class hero concept, which I think is a nice addition to the game, as well as villains that you can actually recruit as heroes. So that's a nice little bonus. And in general, the reason this one is so much higher for me is the amount of new modes and things that are added to the game that I think really increase the longevity of it, namely sidekicks. A brand new deck of sidekick cards. When you buy one of those, you get to spend it to draw 2 cards on your turn. They only cost 2. They're super handy. They are always useful. And compared to the shield officers, I pretty much always want to buy one of those with my leftover points, not so much with the shield officers. Now there's the possibility that multiple masterminds can be in play at once, which will absolutely increase the difficulty of your average game. And there's a 1 versus all mode where one player plays as the mastermind themselves. I can't say this is my favorite mode ever, not one that I will return to that much, but it does add a lot of life to the game and allows for an extra player. So for those reasons, I think this one is just an all-around better package, and to me, something that is more worthwhile picking up earlier in your collection. My favorite Secret Wars Volume 1 hero is Old Man Logan. He just wants to be left alone. He rewards you for not recruiting heroes on your turn. He wants to be alone. My favorite scheme is Fragmented Realities. In this one, each player has their own dimension in front of them with their own deck of villains. And sometimes you will need to help out your friends and attack their villain instead of yours to keep from losing. At number 5, it's Fantastic Five. I wish that's what it was called, just for synergy purposes, but it's the Fantastic Four expansion, which of course includes the Fantastic Four along with Silver Surfer. I'm a big fan of the Fantastic Four, so this is a great set. It's a perfect size for one of these small boxes. I'm a big fan of the new keywords here, like Focus, which lets you spend recruit points for other abilities other than just recruiting new heroes. It turns them into a whole currency that can give you different options, especially late into the game when you may not want to be recruiting new heroes. They still serve a purpose. The villains have some interesting new ones as well, like Burrow, With Burrow, if you defeat a villain, it'll pop up again in the streets unless the streets are already occupied. They burrow underground and crop back up, something Mole Man likes to do a lot. And then there's Galactus, of course. How can you not have Galactus in a Marvel game? And there's a new Cosmic Threat ability. If you name a certain color of card, he will lose some of his strength for as many of those as you reveal. So it's a way to have a really intimidating high attack level for an enemy, but it's still manageable if you get the right cards. My favorite member of this team is Mr. Fantastic himself. His hands are big, so he lets you easily draw a ton of cards and have a big hand of cards. Favorite scheme is pull reality into the negative zone, which will reverse the functions of recruit and attack points at certain stages of the game. Really makes you think on your feet. For number 4, I'm going with Guardians of the Galaxy. Includes Star-Lord, Rocket and Groot, Gamora and Drax, and Thanos as one of the masterminds that you're going up against. This is the one that introduced artifacts. Artifacts are cards that stay out in front of you and have ongoing effects. A keyword and an ability that I really enjoy and I think adds some much appreciated flavor to the game, makes this one feel very unique. And even more unique than that are shards. Shards are tokens that can be gained by heroes or villains to increase their attack power. And you can bank these up for a while and spend them when you want to have some awesome turns where you unleash a whole wave of attack power on the enemies. I love this set for how unique it is and how much it kind of feels like its own little game. I think more so than almost any of the other expansions. Maybe Spider-Man Homecoming does this too, where it feels like I specifically want to play with the Guardians set because of that shard mechanic. It has its own special kind of unique flavor. My favorite Guardian of the Galaxy is Star-Lord. I like artifacts, and if you want artifacts, look no further than Star-Lord. A ton of his cards are artifacts, and you can keep them out to build up shards and power. My favorite scheme is absolutely Forge the Infinity Gauntlet. The Infinity Gem villains in this game are artifacts themselves if you claim them. So if you have Infinity Gems, when a twist goes off with this scheme, they'll go back into the city, and if too many gems are in the city, evil wins. Also, if one player has 4 Infinity Gem artifacts, they become corrupted by power, and they win against all the other players. Very thematic, and you gotta use that against Thanos. It's perfect to fit in, even with the other sets, to have your Infinity War game nights. My number 3 is the X-Men expansion. Who doesn't love X-Men, and who doesn't want more X-Men in Legendary? There's always more of them. Just when you think they're out, you look under the couch and there's a few more X-Men waiting to jump out at you. There's, of course, some more fan favorites in here. I love Jubilee. I love seeing her represented in the game. Colossus and Wolverine now share a card. They bring divided cards back from Civil War. Piercing Energy is a new type of attack. You can use this to attack a villain's victory points as their health instead of their attack power, which can be really strong in some cases and makes you look at villains in a different light. Then there's the Berserk keyword, in which you take the top card of your deck and you get that attack power, if it has any, added to your current turn, which can also be very effective if used properly. The big reason that this one is ranked so high for me is the sheer amount of stuff that it adds to the overall game. Traps are a brand new type of card that will ask you to do something on your turn, and if you can't do it, you might be punished for it, so that adds a new wrinkle to the villain deck. There are now epic masterminds and horror cards that add even more difficulty to things if things weren't tough enough for you already. Then there are tokens, and certain schemes or maybe masterminds will use these token cards to represent different things. Just overall, a lot more depth and variety and a ton of new heroes and villains to work through. My favorite character from the X-Men expansion is Phoenix. Phoenix is all about KOing cards, which is super useful, and if you KO enough cards at the right time, you might also become corrupted and end the game early, winning against all other players. My favorite scheme is Alien Brood Encounters, which takes some notes from the legendary Encounters series of games. In this one, your villain cards go face down and you have to scan them to see what they are. I love the Encounters series, so it's fun to see some of that flavor brought into base legendary. Number 2 is World War Hulk. This is a big expansion, as befitting someone of Hulk's stature. It has a whole bunch of Hulk-related characters and others from the World War Hulk storyline, a lot of wild alien and spacefaring type stuff. And what makes this one so great for me is the new mechanics that have been added, namely transform. Some heroes have transform cards, and when you meet a certain condition, you replace the card with a new transformed version of them that is more powerful. This feels so satisfying to pull off. It gives you this sense of progression, like you're leveling up your card, and on your turn, you have a little goal, like maybe you want to spend a certain amount of recruit or something like that, aside from just simply taking out the villains. It's really cool. I love the way they integrated it. Of course, it makes perfect sense with all of these Hulk characters. Even some masterminds can transform now, and I love that too. Kind of like the way the adapting masterminds work. They will change their tactics on the fly, and you have to react to that. Another keyword I love is Smash. With Smash, you discard a card to get a certain amount of attack points. And it's that simple, and it can be very, very strong. And if you get a bunch of those Smash cards together, you can smash. Of course, Hulk still likes wounds, and in this one, there's a new thing called Wounded Fury. This gives you an attack point for each wound in your discard pile. So once again, you're being rewarded for getting those wounds. And in certain schemes and scenarios, that can be really effective. I can't say that I'm personally super enamored with this storyline or a lot of the characters therein. Many of them I was previously unfamiliar with before exploring this set, but it still won me over in spite of that because I think that those new keywords and mechanics and the way that the heroes and villains interact with each other is so much fun. From this one, my favorite hero is Gladiator Hulk. It's Hulk battling it out in the arena, and he has plenty of ways to draw cards and smash. My favorite scheme from this one has to be World War Hulk. This adds 3 additional masterminds with 2 tactics each instead of 4, but they still rotate in and out, and you have to KO them all to win. It's crazy. And my number 1 Marvel Legendary expansion is Dark City. Probably no surprise, it was my number 1 last time, and I think most people rank this as their number 1s. But why? Let's explore that. Well, this includes a lot of Marvel Knights characters, plus a bunch more X-Men, and I think a lot of the big names that weren't in the original set got added in here. This was the first expansion after all, so it was kind of important. It was kind of a big deal at the time. You got Daredevil, now you got the Punisher, Ghost Rider, some really cool darker characters that I like a lot. The new keywords in this one are very useful and also pretty intuitive. As much as I love a lot of the keywords from later sets, I feel like this one really strikes the right balance of being interesting without being overly complicated or convoluted or confusing or any other words that start with ka. For instance, teleport. If you have a card that teleports like Nightcrawler, you take it out of your hand and you get it on your next turn. Pretty straightforward. Bribe. Now certain enemies you'll have to spend recruit points to attack them instead of attack points because you're bribing them, you're paying them off, they're mob members or what have you. Versatile. Great new keyword. This one has different cards that have both attack and recruit power, and depending on their conditions, you might be able to choose one or maybe even use both of them on your turn. No-brainer kind of an ability that you would want cards to have that I like to see them bring back in later sets. They did do that, but I feel like even more so they could be using versatile cards for some heroes. And in general, it just feels like this one really completes the game from the original core set. This added unique bystanders, so bystanders had special abilities when you rescued them instead of just being worth a victory point and that's it. It also upped the difficulty overall, so a lot of people really appreciated that. It wasn't super easy to take on all these masterminds. You actually had to think a little bit. The new advanced solo mode was brought in this one, and as someone who plays solo mode quite a bit, this is my preferred way to play, so I'm really happy with that. So in general, while later sets maybe added, in some cases, more interesting keywords or had more fan-favorite characters, this is the one that I would have to say, if you're looking for your first set to buy after the core, it's Dark City. My favorite Dark City hero is Daredevil. Daredevil is trying to guess what the costs are of the top cards of his deck. I think it's cool, it's very thematic. I also just love Daredevil, and he pairs really well with characters that let you look at the top cards of your deck. My favorite scheme is Capture Baby Hope. villains are going to be attempting to capture Baby Hope, and you've got to rescue her. If you have her in your victory pile at the end of the game, she's worth points, but she could be moving in and out, and different villains will be picking her up again, and other players might take her after that. It's a cute, thematic little game of keep away. So there you have it. Those are my top 25 Marvel Legendary sets. I think if you were to purchase them in order from number 1 and going on into the list, you'd have a very good time. You'd be happy with the results. Of course, if you're a big fan of something like Fantastic Four or Guardians of the Galaxy, then I would probably say, well, pick one of those up first, and you can't go wrong with that. Now, a lot of these sets tend to go in and out of print. I know Dark City in particular was very difficult to find for a long time, so if that's the case right now and I'm recommending things to you that you can't currently purchase, I apologize. But again, I think there's tons of variety in these sets, so if one is really missing for a while, just wait it out. They've been pretty good about eventually reprinting them. Don't overpay too much on eBay if you can help it. The next set we know is going to be released is Into the Cosmos, which features some characters like Yondu and Ronan and Captain Mar-Vell, the outer space characters. And I'm excited about it because it brings back shards, which I loved, as well as Cosmic Threat from Fantastic Four. I really appreciate them when they reuse some of those old keywords. That was one of my biggest complaints from older expansions, is that they kept on introducing new ones. They still do that, but they have also been going back to the well for some of those older ones too. And I think that's good because there's plenty of potential with those. So not having the chance to play Into the Cosmos because it's not out yet, I would imagine that would rank somewhat high up on my list. It sounds like one that I will really be looking forward to. And I've been impressed with what they've been able to bring out and add to the game, particularly, for instance, in the case of the S.H.I.E.L.D. expansion with the new S.H.I.E.L.D. officers, the fact that they have still found ways to bring life to the game in spite of so many expansions existing. That being said, personally, I wouldn't mind if they slowed down a little bit. I do think they have covered all the bases and then some of the characters that you would really want to see in the game, with maybe a few little exceptions here and there for like the diehard fans. And again, there are just so many keywords that at this point it is a headache to look through and try to remember every time you play what they all mean. And you're going to be looking stuff up unless you're really playing all the time. Even then, I can't remember which thing does what or how many levels of Kung Fu or circles of Howard the Duck. But I digress. I'm still going to buy them all, and I'm happy they're still producing them. And we'll see if they ever come out with a storage solution that's actually worthwhile, if that's even possible at this point, because there are so many cards. But I really want to hear from you guys what you think. Where do you slot these different expansions? Do you like Secret Wars Volume 1 or 2 better? Do you think the core set deserves to be in the top 10? Or maybe you think it should just be number 1 by default because it's so good? Talk to me down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and enduring this. And until next time, of course, I've got to say, Excelsior. And this has been Roll for Crit.
If you want to help out, you can check out our Patreon, or a simple click to like and subscribe can go a long way.
We really appreciate everything that you can do for us. We love you.